Welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight we have returning guest writer, author, and researcher Walter Bosley, speaking about classified space operations and much more. But before I introduce him, check out Raised by Giants on Rokfin. It is a completely uncensored platform. Go over there, set up a free account, get all of my regular content I post here on YouTube, and sign up for Rokfin's premium content, which is far less than a YouTube premium account, at only $10 a month. And you'll get all of my premium uncensored content when it gets released, and all of the other creators' premium content as well, like Beyond Classified, Charlie Robinson, Jay Dyer, Zero with Sam Tripoli, Tinfoil Hat, Eddie Bravo, and Rex Bear Leak Project, and much more. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform, Rokfin. Also, check out C60 Purple Power. It is the most powerful antioxidant on the planet. Helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF radiation, and a lot more. It's a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code GIANTS10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. I highly recommend it. I've been using it for over a year with my own money, and I wouldn't recommend something that doesn't work. Walter Bosley, my friend, thanks so much for coming on. You're the first show of the new year, and I think it's going to be a wonderful, amazing show in light of everything that's happened since our last interview, wow, looking back on that, we really said some things that have played out almost verbatim since that last interview. So thank you and welcome. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having me back on. I always enjoy talking with you. And yeah, you're right. And, let's start out by saying, you know, as we talk about what's been going on, most of us folks, guys like us who research this stuff and most of the people are not surprised by what came about in the we're not surprised, we're just vindicated. It's like, yeah, absolutely, that's exactly what we were saying. It was all BS.
Yeah, and I feel vindicated, and I kind of jumped onto the whole thing kind of late, though I did have a lot of suspicions, right? Because remember, I have interviewed some of these people. I even said this in our very first interview together back, 7 or 8 months ago when I did that two-part interview. I separated out the two parts. I said at the end of that video, I was like, hey, like I have interviewed these people before, but that was a part of my process. Like I had to, because I knew that there was something deeper going on here. I just couldn't quite put my thumb on exactly what was happening and what was going on. And as it unraveled and as I was critically thinking about it and bringing common sense into the equation and the MK Ultra stuff and all that, I was like, okay, this is what's going on, and it's been proven, that it is, and in those depositions are the most incriminating depositions I think that I've ever witnessed in the history of court depositions. He basically lays it all out there. It's the most incredible it's the most incredible thing I think I've ever witnessed. But what did you think about them when you watched them? Because I'm assuming that you've watched all of them, right?
Every friggin' minute. It was a joy. It was not a surprise, like I said, because a lot of us knew that it was all BS from the get-go. We knew what he was doing. We knew what his camp was doing. We knew what those who came after him were doing. And to terrorize, this says a lot of not too good things about, the American judicial system. The fact that, once again, folks, here's an example of one citizen can terrorize others through the courts, through frivolous lawsuits. Something needs to be done about the frivolous lawsuits issue. That aside, yeah, absolutely. I don't know. You saw his angry reaction, and yeah, we're talking about Mr. Good. Everybody has seen his angry reaction to those being posted. He must have really thought that all of that would be secret and private. He's talking as if the people who released it are going to be in big trouble. Once again, more terrorism coming from his mouth. But we're still waiting for, I believe, the court to give its final word on whether that was illegal or not for it to be released. And I mean, I'm thinking it wasn't. I'm hoping it wasn't, because you're absolutely right. It's all in there. Folks, if you haven't seen the depositions or had the recap of them, Corey Good admits that it's all fake, that he was asked directly, did you ever physically go into outer space? And he said, no, I did not. It was all that typical new age. I was channeling it, dude. It was in the mind. And people wonder why. I'm going off on a long string here, I know that, but people wonder, I believe that things like psychic phenomena have a basis in reality. I personally think that these concepts, have some reality to them. This is why it really irritates me, all the flim flam that goes on in the community, because it's clearly a bunch of people making crap up. And, it just gives a serious discussion about these things, these phenomena, a bad name. What it does is it turns off a lot of people. And that's really the category that these alleged SSP commandos jumping through time and space and all this stuff, that's what they did, was they damaged, a legitimate topic, legitimate conversation. And, for what? I think I have to say this. I got to wave this flag. I said when he came on the scene that he'll have about 3 to 5 years where, he'll be on the scene. And I was pretty close, because he burst out on the scene in the big way in 2015. By 2018, it was beginning to unravel. And so, there was the 3-year point. And by a couple of years ago, he was already essentially, the wheels had fallen off the wagon. So he had his 3 to 5 years of spotlight time. And there's so much to talk about this. That's why I'm going on and on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing that I've seen happen is all of the other SSP whistleblowers and super soldiers that have claimed to be a part of this program and fighting aliens in space for 20 years and age regress back in time to the original point that they were taken and all that bullshit nonsense.
Right.
What they're trying to do to cover up and make their story seem legitimate, right? They're actually referencing people that were a part of, like Randy Kramer. They're like, oh yeah, Randy Kramer created the 20 and back program before Corey. Well, do you know where
that's what they're doing. Okay.
Yeah. Do you even know where Randy Kramer even came from? Randy Kramer came directly out of Michael Salla. Michael Salla was the very first person to interview Randy Kramer in 2014, of August of 2014.
He's a boob. So is Salla. They have no credibility, folks. Neither Salla nor Kramer, any of these guys, zero credibility. There, I've said it. I'll stand by that.
Yeah, and it's like, and then they're also referencing like, oh well, there were people talking about the secret space program 20 years ago, 20, 30. Well, I'm like, sure, maybe they were, but they weren't talking about traveling, fighting aliens in space for 20 years. They were talking about.
It wasn't in the context of these ridiculous comic book stories. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad whoever, is bringing that up. Yeah, you're right. There have been people talking about secret space program issues for, the last couple of decades. And before this Corey Good crap and his associates came out, it was the legitimate discussion, right? It was the, people that were looking at what were likely classified space missions of NASA, of the military, a true classified space ops program, not any of this fantasy crap. So yeah, we shouldn't be surprised, because these are the kind of people that, they've got a commercial stake in this, and they want to go on getting their attention from the various shows out there that will feature them. They want to be asked to speak at the conferences that they're being asked to speak at. They want that to continue, and of course they're going to start, shucking and jiving and shifting their feet and changing their story up to grasp at whatever shred of credibility they have with their audience, because they have no credibility with any thinking people. So that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and a lot of them are referencing Bill Cooper and Behold a Pale Horse
Mm-hmm.
for copywriting coming out with the secret space program first. But what they don't realize is that he never mentions the secret space program. He calls it the real space program, which is similar in nature. I'll give him that is similar in nature, but it's a different title. So they even have
Yeah.
that wrong. Right?
Well, and think about what Cooper's referring to, I think, is more in the spirit of that legitimate SSP discussion I was talking about, not this fantasy Corey Good stuff where there's some ridiculous Starfleet sized space program going on, on that level, and all this time travel stuff with it. So I would say, if Cooper were around today, he might beg to differ with them,
Yeah.
or that might be why they're hearkening back to Cooper, because he isn't with us anymore, right? When someone's not here to disagree with you, kind of tag your stuff onto on them. See, this guy backs me up. Well, you don't know that.
And they're referencing William Tompkins to which he is dead as well. It's exactly that same thing. And just like Lou Elizondo, that dead senator that he has a letter for that verifies that he was the head of this ATIP program, but he's not alive to even verify that he was the head of the ATIP program. So they're using dead people to verify their stories, that they can't come out and be like, hey, yeah, this is real or this isn't real,
Right. Yeah.
Attempting to rewrite history, basically,
Mm-hmm.
is what I see that they're trying to do. Now, I don't know how far that's going to work, or what that's going to do. But in the beginning of our last interview, I don't know if you remember this. I said, "Do you see?" I asked this question. I said, "Do you see a transition happening?" I said, "Do you see people getting away from this fairy tale bullshit nonsense and getting into the real, actual research?" And I think we're at that tipping point right now, a little bit. I think we're going to start moving more into the research side of this.
Maybe. I would hope so. I'd like to see that, but here's an issue that we have. Um, we have in my opinion, what I propose is the greatest confirmation that the more serious SSP discussion was right on the money in the establishment of Space Force. Now, when it first came out, oh, gee, certain political opponents of it, they even came out, Hollywood even came out with their TV series making fun of Space Force. And, gee, it's a real thing. It's here to stay. It is a branch of the military. And what that means is, in the standing up of Space Force, for those who didn't believe that there was any kind of classified military space ops going on before Space Force, I got news for you. You can count on it existing henceforth. Okay, now we come from the school of thought that they've been doing classified space ops. Now, I've said it before. It's my opinion that all the classified space ops that had gone on before the standing up of Space Force this just gets folded into the history of the space ops and will become part of the background leading up to Space Force. You know,
Yep.
so uh, again, if fine, if you don't want to buy that it was going on before Space Force, you can't deny that it will be going on under Space Force, because we know that all the other military branches have classified ops, right?
Yep.
What makes people think that Space Force ain't going to do that? Come on. Of course they're going to do it, because in my opinion, they're going to continue what the U.S. has been doing since the late 40s anyway with this. But the downside to this that I'm talking about is, because of that, it might be harder to get a look and have that same legitimate SSP discussion that I referred to, that up till 2015 that was getting more prominence. Because now, if it's a part of an actual active branch of the military, things will be clamped down on even more so. Because think about it, classified space stuff before a Space Force, they had to really hide it, right? Now they can be more, well, of course there's classified ops in space. We have, the Navy has classified ops. We don't tell you about the details of those, nor what the Army or Air Force is doing, and you accept it because these are very publicly known organizations. Same thing with Space Force. Now they can just even more clamp down on even more sources of information on what we're really doing secretly in space, because they can just say, well, of course that's clamped down. Of course you can't get that, because that reveals what our new branch is doing. So it might actually, because of that, ironically, be more difficult now to return to a legitimate SSP conversation. And then the other little side part of that is, these clowns, there's always going to be some radio show or some media outlet in our community that's going to be more than willing to feature their circus. It's going to be on a smaller level. I don't see some of the bigger names wanting more egg on their face. Jimmy Church. Oh, did I say a name there? There was
I didn't
one
hear anything.
particular guy, everybody knows who I'm talking about, who really pushed Corey Good. And what I'm saying is the bigger names like that probably won't feature the clowns anymore. But there's going to be other people who will. So, but I think their exposure, and rightfully so, is going to be, I'm hoping, will be greatly reduced, because it doesn't help the search for truth, crap like that.
Well, you've seen what Jimmy Church kind of did with his whole show. He flipped it into a CIA op and just interviewed nothing but CIA and DIA people that are a part of this government disclosure thing. Like, he switched it up, but in a different way. Still bullshit nonsense, but from a different group of
Yeah,
people.
just what is it? It's a popular tactic to just, what you were a big strong advocate for before, just stop talking about that, and just go forward on another track, and people will forget. Most of your audience will forget that you were an advocate for some BS. And that's a tactic he's using there. A lot of them do it. But now, I on the other side of this coin that we're talking about, I hate to see a knee-jerk reaction to those for whom this whole deposition revelation was a surprise. I hate to see them have a knee-jerk reaction, and this does happen, where any kind of speculative discussion therefore is demonized, and you can't even do that. I have seen some hosts and other folks in the community do that, where the pendulum swings back. They're so angry at the fantasy storytellers that then anybody with any kind of speculative hypothesis is therefore suspect and shouldn't be. And this whole field, this community, the things we talk about, if you can't have a speculative discussion, it all goes away. And what's wrong with a speculative? There's nothing wrong with a speculative discussion, because the honest person says, hey, this is a hypothesis, this is what I think, I don't know whether I'm right or not. And this is where the storytellers have kind of ruined things, is them coming out saying, oh, well, I know this to be true because of my insider. See, there's the line. That's the crap we need to. Yeah, right. Okay, you're anonymous insider, or you were a time jump in this, that, and the other. No, BS. And the acceptable side of the line is where people say, yeah, this is my hypothesis. I don't know for sure. I could be wrong about this or that. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But I hope that this whole thing, or this revelation from Corey Good's deposition, I hope this does, put the nail in the coffin on the discussion, these fantasy discussions. I would like to see it have a longer term effect and impact on the community, in that this kind of crap just won't get started again. But unfortunately, there's dummies out there that just want to hear these stories and believe it. And I don't know any more polite way to put it. So I think we're not going to be entirely rid of them, but hopefully they will not be hogging the spotlight anymore. And shame on the outlets that continue giving them the big spotlight when, it's clearly fake stuff. But,
Yeah, that's why I'm just like straight up and out forward, about it. Like, I'm not going to take down any of those episodes with any of those people. Like, if people want to go watch them, they're all on my channel. I'm not trying to hide anything. It was just a part of my process, and like what I had to do to try and discover the truth, and move on from it.
And I don't fault people that during a time, well, people are talking about this Corey Good guy or that Randy Kramer guy. Let's have him on and bring him on. There were plenty of hosts, like you said, you went through a process where even though they were interviewing that person and they were on their show, you could tell they were like, what's your source on that? Or I'm not sure I'm buying this. And then, they would go on to other guests and other discussions, right? It's the people who really push that as, hey, believe this, it's all true, take our word for it. That's the problem. I think is the real hardcore pushers of these fake narratives.
I agree 100%. So speaking of this, this real rudimentary secret space program, and again, that's going to be like a really, I think we just need to make up a different title for it, because it's been lumped into like everything so much, and it's just gotten a really bad name. But you've written several books on this. You've written books on the Sonora Aero Club and on NIMSA, and all that. And you've made a lot of good connections for a lot of this technology and a lot of these UFOs actually being our technology and the technology that we've created on our own. So I think that this is a very important time to kind of go back and touch on that. And I know that we've talked about it in previous interviews, but I think right now it's the most important thing to really be discussing, because I do believe that there is a real element to this, but again, it's just been overshadowed by all of this bullshit nonsense, and that's served as a cover so that the governments and the three-letter organizations don't have to take responsibility or reveal any of the technology that they have created on their own.
Right. Well, if you'll notice, a couple of years back, I think I started referring in this discussion I started calling it classified space ops, to get away from using the SSP secret space program moniker, because as you said, that's been kind of tainted by the nonsense. But when you go back and look through the history of aviation in the United States in particular, which naturally leads to space, space aviation, as it were, you really begin to see where the pursuit of going into space was actually there much earlier in a serious way. We're not talking about, well, yeah, everybody knows the rocket engineers and stuff. When they were little boys, they read Jules Verne, blah, 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 and it inspired. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the actual, aviation scientists. Excuse me. Aviation scientists dating back to the late teens and early 1920s. They were seriously thinking, how do we get into space? Okay, they were pursuing this in aviation medicine. Now, a lot of people, myself included, I would never have guessed that aviation medicine would reveal as much about what I think was classified, space ops as it does. And one of the things that you'll learn is when you look at Operation Paperclip and you discover that the seed for that, the origin for that, wasn't about the bomb, getting the bomb scientists. The origin of Operation Paperclip started with one of our top aviation medicine scientists and pilots, Colonel Harry Armstrong. At the end of World War II, he was, before the war, the German aviation scientists and aviation medicine specialists, and the Americans and the Europeans, they all knew each other. They were going to the same scientific conferences and they were sharing notes and ideas. And then, of course, politics and the war happens. And as we're approaching the end of the war, the Allies are controlling, there's an area, it's in Heidelberg, and they put together this list of aviation scientists of the Luftwaffe of Germany that they want to get their hands on and bring to the United States. So the brainchild of Operation Paperclip came out of the aviation medicine field, and it was to get the German experts that had these big reputations that Armstrong and the others knew personally. They wanted to get them in America for what was clearly going to be a post-war pursuit of putting man in space. And this was the impetus for Operation Paperclip, not just the bomb, not even primarily the bomb. And when you look more closely at the way it went down, there's reason to suspect that actually Operation Paperclip was a German idea. In other words, that the scientist associates of Armstrong said, hey, we have an idea. Why don't, you bring us, to the States and we'll work for your side, that kind of thing. And yeah, we'll help you put man in space. So it really dates back to before Roswell, the serious pursuit of this. Now, some people know, those who've read my book, Shimmering Light, that my hypothesis I propose reflects what I was just talking about. And my hypothesis for Roswell is that it was not an extraterrestrial incident. In my hypothesis, all the elements, the historical elements that this is a matter of record, all the elements are in place in New Mexico for Roswell to actually have been a first classified attempt at putting man in space by the United States, working with the paperclip German aviation scientists and aviation engineers. Okay. I still, the hypothesis is solid. So I still, think that it's viable. That's why I, share it with folks, is because when you look at the historical context up to what happened in Roswell in 1947 and what happened afterward going forward, one of those aviation medicine specialists for the U.S. Army Air Corps that was there with Armstrong, working very closely with Armstrong when they started Operation Paperclip, was he became a general. He was a colonel then, and that was Otis Benson. If I got the first name right, he became Major General Benson in the 50s, after the U.S. Air Force was founded as a separate branch in the National Security Act of 1947. Interesting timing. Benson, during the 50s, became the commander of U.S. Air Force aviation medicine. And when you look back at what he was dedicated to and where he was aiming U.S. Air Force aviation medicine, folks, it wasn't just, the end game wasn't just higher altitude bombers and keeping the crews able to breathe up in a high altitude bomber. No. The high altitude bombers and all of that was merely a side product on the way to what their actual goal was, and that was manned space travel. That's what they were going for from the beginning, since before the U.S. Air Force stood up, and that was Benson's aviation medicine command of the U.S. Air Force during the 50s was all about man in space. The what they learned along the way, yes, it served the technology needed for our high altitude bombers, right? Keeping the crews alive and alert and warm and all that stuff, being able to function at high altitude, and to put, to have the secret spy planes, of course. But that was a side product on the way to what their primary objective was, and that was space operations. And that, of course, jibes completely with why before NASA, okay, NASA was stood up in October of 1958. Okay, now, if you've all seen The Right Stuff and you're familiar with the Mercury space program, our first 7 astronauts,
test flights.
that was originally Mercury, even by name, Mercury, and everything they were designing up until NASA stood up in 1958 was already being designed and developed and pursued by the U.S. Air Force. Our Mercury space program was a U.S. Air Force program until they stood up NASA in October of 58. And then, as history tells us, NASA takes over Mercury. Well, in my opinion, NASA took over the public civilian Mercury program, because if you go back and look at documentation of the late 50s and early 60s, you'll see where the plan, even in their planning, in their illustrations, they showed where the military, they plan to use, we're told they plan to use, I think they did do it. They were using the same exact capsules and rocket technology and designs, but it was going to be, would say U.S. Air Force, not NASA. So who's to say that they weren't actually doing it? Okay, we don't know. In fact, when you look closely at this topic, you see where there is evidence that they indeed were doing this. And that's how, think about how easy it would be to hide or obfuscate even, a civilian witnessing the classified space stuff, because it would look identical to the NASA stuff. And if it's far enough away, you see it. This is a hypothetical, but you're not going to see it to see what's written on the side of it. And who's to say that, if it's classified, they're probably not going to have a big USAF painted on the side of it. So people would see, oh, that's NASA, because we know what the NASA capsule looks like. It looks just like that. So it must be NASA, and so it makes it easier to kind of hide it in plain sight. But there's the issue of, when you go back and look at the airframes that were being pursued starting in the 50s and going into the 60s, you see that there's one particular thing I include in my talk that I gave at the online Contact in the Desert conference, the last Contact in the Desert conference, and I show you actual Air Force literature where they show 3 different airframes that are projected spacecraft type airframes that they're going to pursue. And what's interesting is 2 of them, of the 3, look pretty much exactly like what was being reported as UFOs. And in one particular case, specifically what was described by the best witnesses among what there is, that Roswell looked like. And so, you begin to see, oh, wait a minute. The literature today, the way it's interpreted is, well, this is what they had on the drawing boards. Nah, what they were probably doing was testing these things in actuality. And so that's just one example of some of the clues and the evidence that when you go back to reverse engineer it from our perspective on history, you can see where, okay. And that third frame, airframe I'm talking about, that was what led to the thing called Dyna-Soar, SOAR, little play on words there. But that was the thing that led to the space shuttle that we got in the 70s. So from the very beginning, the late 40s, they were always pursuing the winged space plane thing. Publicly, we got the space truck glider, the shuttle, but what did they do secretly, with the space plane idea? We don't know for sure, but all of that now, all of that just simply can be folded into what led to Space Force, in my opinion. It now it just becomes part of that background classified portion of the history of how we ended up with Space Force branch.
What's really interesting, Walter, is that I'm pretty sure that those test flights that NASA was doing, the Mercury test flights, those test flights never went out of the upper atmosphere of Earth. They never, I'm pretty sure that they only went around the lower atmosphere. So then I'm thinking, well, if they never went outside of the atmosphere of Earth, you would think that you would need to test more, right? You would think that you would need to be testing outside of the atmosphere
Sure.
of Earth if you were planning on going to the moon, like
Sure.
they said in 1969, right? You wouldn't just not go outside of the atmosphere of Earth and then all of a sudden decide to go 500,000 miles away from the planet to the moon in 1969, right? So it's kind of interesting. I don't know really what's going on there, but the military just released a new craft. I don't know if you saw it. I'm trying to find it here. I posted it on my Facebook, but it looks very similar to a UFO. Yeah, it's the B-21. I don't have it on my phone, but let me see if I can. Can you see that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen what pictures they've released of that. Yeah. From that perspective, it certainly does look like a classic, what people say, oh, it's a flying saucer shape. Yeah. Yeah. That's, it's really, from a nerdy, down to earth, no pun intended, perspective on aviation. The B-21 was, first of all, it came together faster than these things usually do, and the main reason was there's little to nothing on that aircraft that is new technology. What they did was they took what had already existed on the B-2 and some of the other things they were doing for the like the F-22 and the F-35, stuff that had already been developed, already been tested, already being used, and they whipped it all together, and that was the result, was the B-21. So what it is like I guess you'd call it a second generation B-2, really. But that's how they were able. Oh, that's how they were able to come in, I believe, on schedule, under schedule, and either on or under budget, if I'm not mistaken. And that's because it used all previously designed and tested in existing technology. So and now that's the part that we know about on that aircraft. I guarantee you there's going to be elements of that aircraft that the public is not being aware. I mean, the obvious, if they tell you the ceiling is this, it's going to be more like that. If they tell you, its distance that it can go is this, it's going to be that. I mean, that's only smart to do, with military aircraft is, you never. Now, that goes back to what you were saying. The NASA Mercury program may have only gone so high, but what you're talking about, you want to test outside the low Earth orbit, that's probably what the classified Mercury missions were doing. The ones we haven't learned about, that I guarantee you, they would have been the ones. Okay, this is the real ballsy one. You're going to be going outside that, and so they are getting that data in my opinion, on a classified level. Always, it's never, the limit is never what we are told or even subsequently find out through our own research. It's always more and higher.
Well, I mean, it only makes sense. Like, why would they reveal their entire hand? If
Right.
you have a winning hand, why are you going to reveal it? You're not going to
Right.
reveal it too soon.
Yeah.
You're going to wait until you have even more advanced technology and you've
Yeah.
gone further with it to reveal what you previously had. It only makes
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
strategically.
Right. Because in a legitimate war, not something spun up by the military industrial complex, but in a legitimate, war, we want our machinery to take them by surprise, to whoop ass on a dark and stormy night, and be better than anything that a foe, the opposition, can put up there. Yeah, that's why we hide. That's why we hide things, is because we want that element of surprise. Because the real way to fight a war is to fight it 100% decisively and get it over with as soon as possible. You know, um, 20 years in any war theater, is just not, that's shenanigans right there. That's shenanigans.
Yep. Propaganda and manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that your theory about Roswell is highly plausible and very likely, because if it was some kind of craft that was developed and engineered by the Americas in congruency with the Project Paperclip people that came over from Germany, the aerospace techs, and then it did end up crashing, and it was a classified project, then that
Mm-hmm.
would make sense that these people would have no idea what it was, and they would be like, "Oh, well, I've never seen this technology before." That one, what's that one military colonel or whatever that everyone cites for
Oh,
it being alien?
Marcel.
Marcel, yeah,
Yeah.
Colonel Marcel saying that we don't have any technology. I've never seen
No.
anything like this before. Well, you wouldn't have if it was an actual, real classified project, right?
Yeah, no disrespect to Colonel Marcel, but he was not in the position to have been briefed in at something that would have been that secret. And this is what bothers me up in our times with, Commander Fravor, in his story with the Tic Tac. What he makes a comment in a couple of interviews, which, if I were having a beer with Commander Fravor, I'd say, "Sir," because he outranks me. I'd say, "Sir, you know better than to make comments like, 'If I didn't know about it, it's not ours.'" Because I'm sorry, up to a certain level, yeah, you're a squadron commander, naval aviator. Yeah, you're going to be briefed up to a certain, but something that's being tested, something that's not out there yet. I'm sorry. It might bruise a pilot's ego, and believe me, they've got them. And believe me, I was in a specialty in the Air Force that also possesses a big, fat, high level ego, and that's being an agent. But so we recognize an ego when we see one. But despite their ego, not every fighter pilot is going to be briefed in on the latest, advanced, most secret things. Sorry, they're just not. And there's a reason for that, multiple reasons for that, not the least of which is so that when they're in the testing phase, they can get an honest reaction from our personnel, so they can gauge how is an enemy pilot going to react to this. They want to get that authentic reaction. So if they're telling all our pilots everything we've got, they're going to go, "Oh, that's ours. That's that thing they're developing." No, they want to test the wow stuff on our pilots, squadrons of our pilots, to see them go, "What the hell is that?" and see how they react. That's part of the testing. There's a bunch of people who just didn't want to hear that a few years ago when the Tic Tac thing first came out, and I was telling them that years ago. No, no, no. I mean, I had, no disrespect intended to our friends in the community, but I had people with no military experience. They're just UFO fans telling me I didn't know what I was talking about. I used to be, in the Air Force, program protection, brief. Yeah, it's like I didn't know what I was talking about. At that point, I'm like, I'm checking out of this conversation. But uh, that's the thing. You're absolutely right. Colonel Marcel was, all due respect, not in any position to have been briefed in on, if, remember, folks, listen to me, I'm putting an if my hypothesis is correct under that context, those circumstances, Colonel Marcel would have been in no position to have been briefed in on something like what I propose Roswell may have been. That's the thing. So you're right. From his perspective, that ain't ours, because he wasn't aware of it. But, that's just not how that world works. It's very compartmentalized.
Now, since we're on the Area 51 things, I'm just going to play devil's advocate to get your opinions and
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. What do you think about the alien bodies that were supposedly recovered? What's your thoughts on that? Because there's been several people. Are they just making it up, or like what's going on there? Because apparently there was
Well,
like three of them or whatever, and they, you know, the story. It's a mythological story that's been told
you
over and
know,
over and over again. But what do you think?
20 years or so ago, a couple of researchers did their investigations, did their research, and they lay it out in their books that so many of these often cited Roswell witnesses were just BS artists. Some of them didn't even exist. But here's the thing: the Roswell community, they've got a financial stake in the ET hypothesis on Roswell. So they lead the charge on, oh, those sources aren't legitimate. Oh, those sources you can't trust. So they've chosen the ET Roswell ET crowd, they've just chosen to ignore the fact that, a lot of this testimony, like you're referring to, was proven, 20 years ago to be nothing, to be not true, and you can't rely on it. But what it is quite honestly, there's just enough money in the Roswell ET narrative that they're not going to let it go. Think about it. Have you been to Roswell, New Mexico ever?
No, I haven't. I
I've
wanted
been
to though.
once, and there's ET merchandising all over that town, and good for them. They're making,
Yeah.
it's their town, this thing, but still, it's so. Think about it. You go suddenly, saying or proving or convincing people, nothing ET happened there, then there's going to be a bunch of people just right there locally who are going to lose money on T-shirts, mugs, tchotchkes, you name it. Okay. The big Roswell Museum, well, it just becomes, fantasy land because the whole theme there is that it was ET, ET, ET. And so that's what any anybody who doesn't want to buy into the ET hypothesis for Roswell, that's what you're up against is, somebody's making money off of Roswell being an ET incident. And so they're going to protect their investment. And, really that's ultimately what it comes down to is they're just protecting that investment. There's enough people that choose to believe in that almost like a religion that it had to have been ET, and you can't argue with them. You just kind of got to let them believe what they want to believe and move along, that kind of thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I'm at on it. I for a long time I've been convinced that it had nothing to do with any kind of ET incident.
So since we're kind of on debunking some of the lore here, and I think that this is a really good one that's been established within the UFO lore and
Mm-hmm.
community for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the Men in Black, right? And I'm pretty sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you were kind of a Man in Black, were you not?
Oh, I'm split on that. I think there definitely is something to the Men in Black within the context that John Keel and you know researchers in that ilk talk about. Um, the Men in Black that are the clearly, the government agent types, human beings just going around threatening people, hey, shut up, blah, blah, blah. A lot of those stories are BS. But even the ones that aren't BS that are legitimate, there's clearly a line between when you read the accounts and the description, you can clearly tell the ones that are the government agent types just trying to keep a lid on something and the weird Men in Black phenomena that again John Keel he talked to people that had encountered them and almost that kind of weird automaton there's something strange going on here with this but also, again, there's another thing, like with the Roswell ET hypothesis. When you look closely at some of the original Men in Black accounts where it's clearly, agents from the government, what you find is they weren't going out and threatening so much as they were going out and saying, hey, this has to do with national security. be a good citizen, help us keep a lid on this, please don't talk to newspapers about it. That it was more of they were asking people to be good citizens when you read more of these actual accounts. But this whole thing about the government silencers, it was fun to talk about. It was a good spooky story, and it just takes off and evolves over the course of a couple of decades to where we end up with these funny Men in Black movies, and now everybody thinks of the Men in Black as just the secret government agents silencing all this stuff. And when you mention the weird origin of the Men in Black stories, like what again John Keel and in some cases Jacques Vallée reported on, where it's more weird stuff going on, a lot of people have never heard of that. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, the origin of the Men in Black wasn't government agents erasing people's memories or telling them to shut up. It was these weird characters that seemed to come out of nowhere and acted like they were, from another dimension or something, and weird phenomena came associated with them. That seems to have been pushed down. And the public, it's like somebody says, yeah, it's ETs, yeah, it's secret government agents, all you masses, latch on to that. We don't want you thinking about the origin, the weird aspect of it. We don't want you thinking about that. From my perspective, when I see that kind of thing going on, or I suspect it, that tells me there's something to the weird accounts, and they're trying to divert us with the popular account. And that's another thing. Again, going back to the Roswell ET folks, I try to tell them, consider how heavily the Roswell ET thing has been pushed in the public, and consider that maybe that's been a sleight of hand.
I agree. And the Roswell ET hypothesis didn't really become a real hypothesis until what, the 90s, like
1980
19
is
yeah,
when the book, I believe it was 80, when the book The Roswell Incident was released. And my dad had been telling me that narrative starting in 1974. And I talk about that in my book Shimmering Light, and I talk about my hypothesis on why my dad would have been talking about that narrative in 1974. And here's one of the inconvenient facts of all of this. Along with pursuing man in space in the 1950s, the CIA was pursuing MK Ultra, and they introduced it to the military branches for special ops. And out of all the military branches, the one branch that the CIA noted, and all the historians note, that got really excited and turned on by the MK Ultra stuff that was being developed was the U.S. Air Force. So much so that they started their own MK Ultra research independent of the CIA. Okay. And this was started in the early mid 50s. So at the same time that the UFO alien ET and stuff was being out there and proliferated, the Air Force was playing with MK Ultra, which, folks, the big part of MK Ultra and how it works is laying a false narrative in the psyche, in the human memory. Okay. Now, gee, what would the Air Force, we haven't heard about the Air Force MK Ultra. What would they have been doing? Well, that's just it. You haven't, because the 1973 Church Committee before Congress, the CIA had to come clean about MK Ultra, right? That's when they had to admit the nefarious things they were doing. But the U.S. Air Force, to this day, has never been made to stand before Congress and reveal what they have been doing since 1955 with MK Ultra. Think about that. And whose purview was Project Blue Book and all the narrative about UFO? The U.S. Air Force. Okay, so all this to say, and I lay this out in greater detail in my book Shimmering Light, all this to say that the Roswell ET narrative, in my opinion, is a false narrative, okay, created by the U.S. Air Force for whatever purposes. And that includes why my dad would have been telling this story. And I go into that in the book as well, because he was in the Air Force. He was in the Aerospace Medicine Command. He specifically was part of a unit that did the ground testing for the Mercury space program pressure suits, what the astronauts wore. Okay. His unit, his specific unit at George Air Force Base, which was up here in Victorville, Hesperia, they did some of the ground testing because their stuff was connected with some stuff Edwards was doing at the time. And so my dad was in the right command at the right time and had the right clearance and was doing the right job to have been exposed to U.S. Air Force MK Ultra techniques. And so that's part of, I lay all that out, the details to back it up. This doesn't just come out of my imagination, trying to make up cool stories about my dad. I did my investigative research and I lay it out in that book. But basically, what I'm saying is that even he worked on something that in itself was potentially very fascinating. And I think I propose that he and other people that worked on this had a false narrative using hypnosis and narcotics, so that after the project they wouldn't even remember having worked on a project. So it was an extra level of security. Now remember, this was in the days when they were toying around with MK Ultra and it was new. So in their perspective, it would have been, hey, this is a way we can keep another level of secrecy. And the personnel would have gone along, hey, you're going to work on this ultra secret thing, but afterwards we're going to hypnotize you and you're not even going to have to worry about spilling the beans because you're not going to remember it. And I guarantee you, my dad and these other young guys would have said, count me in, because they would have trusted, they would have looked at it as part of the job, being a good airman, good patriot. And of course there were downside and bad side effects over the years, but at the time they wouldn't have looked at it that way, and I think that's why my dad was telling me what was essentially not exactly, because there were some essential differences on who these people were and where they came from, but the idea that they were people from another world, I think it's very possible was an Air Force MK Ultra false narrative laid down in his psyche.
It seems like that they used the CIA as a scapegoat in that. And they were like, okay, yeah, we were doing these MK Ultra programs, and we're going to declassify the documents, the 149 sub projects of MK Ultra, to the public. We're going to disclose it, all while along the Air Force is running their own projects. I think the CIA has actually gotten a huge bad rap for like a lot of things when it's a lot of the other intelligence organizations like Army intelligence, the DIA, like a lot of these other intelligence operations have been doing almost the exact same thing that the CIA has been blamed for.
Yeah, I think it was, maybe I'm getting my acronyms mixed up with other things, but I think what the Army CID got in trouble with in the 70s was COINTELPRO, right? I think it was COINTEL. It was the thing that the Army CID was doing domestically in the U.S. that was potentially affecting civilians. They got in big trouble for that, right? And and you're right. How the CIA can take a rap for that is when you're a military agent or intel, specialist, and you have to work domestically in the United States, you are, by regulation and law, you have to work with the FBI, for example, in any domestic activity. Now, once you get out of the borders of the U.S., you're in foreign territory. You don't have to work with the FBI or even the CIA, but they very often would work with CIA as well. And you're right, it could be a bad reflection on CIA, but CIA's own nefarious doings, in my opinion, you're right there. The majority of CIA operatives and employees aren't out there doing these creepy, crappy things that the CIA has been involved with. That's the people at the higher levels. That's the people that, quite frankly, are in McLean, Virginia, at the headquarters, thinking this crap up. And of course, you're always going to have people that are out in the field that are willing to do any sleazy thing that they know is questionable because it's good for their careers. So for example, hypothetical, what if FBI headquarters sent a squad of FBI agents to do a raid that was highly questionable? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. they're going to get the agents for that special activity. They're going to get agents that are already kind of on their team. There's going to be a bunch of agents that would say, that's no, that's against regulation. It's against federal law. It's unconstitutional. No, I won't be a part of that. Well, they don't want to fool with telling an agent like that to do it. What they do is they get younger or newer agents or agents that think like them on the personal level. And these are the agents that they kind of cluster around. And these are the ones that participate and cooperate with these nefarious things we see one of these agencies doing. But the majority, like I have sources inside the FBI still, and they've told me, for the last few years that that 90% of the agents they know and work with, they're just disgusted with headquarters. That most of the agents, it just pisses them off what they see headquarters and other agents doing. So it's not the whole organization. It's unfortunately the people who get the reins of power. And it's they make an organization the scapegoat by default. And indeed that's the kind of thing that has happened. But the CIA, it's a mixed bag, because for all the good they've done, it appears more and more like there's an equal amount of bad they've been doing, and that's troubling.
Well, I really figured this out, that a lot of these three-letter organizations have been funding the same kinds of programs through researching the Stargate project, which the Stargate project was the remote viewing ESP special access program that the DIA was doing. First, it was Army intelligence, and then it transferred to DIA, and then it was supposed to be sent to the CIA in '95, but then the CIA shut it down. But the thing about it is that the CIA already had a remote viewing. Well, they technically, but not really. They were actually funding SRI International in 1972 directly through Sidney Gottlieb, which they were just funneling all of their money through in order to not put it on paper through a certain individual. But it was actually the CIA that was funding it through a certain individual. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, what a lot of people don't know about Sidney Gottlieb, they if they look at this to any degree, they hear that name. That name comes up. But Gottlieb was like, I mean, I think he had nicknames similar to, he was considered like a wizard, because Gottlieb was into occult science and history and lore, and enthusiastically. And he's the one that's credited with bringing a serious study and pursuit of demonology and Enochian, or ritual type magic, like John Dee and Edmund Kelly used to do, and to seriously look at that and see if there was anything they could get out of that. So there's your occult thread. Right there you can point to a name and a face, Sidney Gottlieb. And yet, as you say, he very much was one of the main guys doing MK Ultra things, doing what we would call remote viewing, and all of that. And it makes you wonder, okay, a guy like Gottlieb, yeah, he had his pure science side to him, but was there something going on? Did they tap into something or learn something through this remote viewing thing that would have really turned on a guy like him from that occult perspective? In other words, did they get in touch with something through this? Because my personal view, with my experience, I hit remote viewing pretty hard. I was taught how to do it in 2007 privately, not by Uncle Sam. I was taught the popular protocol going around then that was based on what the Army had been doing, and I did it daily for I think about 10 or 11 months. I have a whole box of all my viewings dating back to 2007, 2008. And my conclusion is this: there's something to it that works, that's real. I did experience that. It is very curious, a very strange thing, but yeah, I did have results that convinced me that there's something to it. When I hear people say, "Oh, it was all just a fake thing to lead the Russians astray," no, it wasn't. There's somebody on certain levels it goes back to Ingo Swann, right? One of
Yeah.
the SRI guys that first developed the protocol and stuff, going back to Gottlieb and all those guys involved. That there's something to it. There's something to it. Now, again, like in our community, you have to point out so often, not everybody you hear, on shows or reading their books is legit. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, there's people out there in the community that are making crap up connected with remote viewing. And again, it gives the discussion of it a bad name. And in some cases could be a diversion. It could be a planted narrative to discredit any serious look at remote viewing because it does work, and they don't want, just everybody doing it. But all I can do is vouch for my experience. I had legitimate results. But here's the thing. Notice I said I had legitimate results. I think there's something to it, but I did it every day for about 10 months, 10 or 11 months. And I've never done it regularly again. That's because you reach a point where you don't know exactly how it's working or why it's working. You don't know. There's kind of a risk to it, if not a danger. There's a risk to it, similar to my opinion of channeling, because you can't guarantee what you're communicating with. You can't guarantee what the source of that feed, so to speak, when you're remote viewing or even channeling, you can't guarantee. You can be cocky and talk in front of a new age conference crowd and say, oh, the high Yolandra from the planet Linky Link is talking to me, and everybody goes, oh yes, yes, wonderful, I've heard about the planet Linky Link from this contactee nut over here, and that one confirms it too. But all of that's nonsense. You really, in the legit experiences of it, if you're having one, you really don't know where this is coming from. And I got to the point with my remote viewings where it wasn't just, hey, where did I put the car keys? Oh, I'll remote view it. It'll tell me exactly where I set them down. No, I was picking specific real world things that I wanted. And the results I was getting in some cases seemed bizarre. A close associate who examined these things suggested that maybe I had reached a point where the feed I was getting, I was picking up data that the best way to describe it was archetypal. So that's useless when you're trying to find the lost car keys to get this archetypal, Jungian mystical bug. It's like, I'm trying to find the car keys, damn it. What practical use is this? And so what happened was I kind of quit doing it because I wasn't sure what I was getting, and it began to lack a practical application. So you kind of, I was in the middle of my Empire of the Wheel investigation stuff kicking off, so I had other things to do anyway. But that was my experience with that, and that's my caution with remote viewing. You got to be careful with these things because, again, you don't know what on the other side is sending you, and if it could send you on a goose chase that could result in could be very dangerous. It could it's like in the film The Mothman Prophecies with Richard Gere. The best part of that movie is when he goes to New York to talk to Alan Bates's character, and Alan Bates is telling him his experience with the Mothman, but he reaches a point where Gere says, this thing has brought me to this town in West Virginia, blah blah blah, and Bates tells him, he goes, hey, whatever brought you there to die. And it's like, we don't know what we're playing with here. There's things in our reality in this world that we don't, that are there that you may not be able to detect or always see, and these things are not always our friends. This is why I have trouble with the folks that say there's no threat from outer space. That's naive and it's ignorant. Unless you're a materialist reductionist who doesn't think any of this is real, then I don't know why you'd be listening to this conversation to begin with, if that's the case. But most people who would be listening to this don't think that way. So, my perspective is, be careful when you deal with these things, because you really don't know that a thread of data that you're pulling in some grand, great mystery could be something leading you to your destruction. I think Keel suspected that. I think Albert K. Bender learned that lesson, despite what Mosley claimed him and Barker were doing when they got drunk. People, there have been people that, it has led to their destruction, either by weird, spooky means or, messing with their own sanity. People make a
Yeah.
lot about Morris Jessup, oh, he was murdered. No, Morris Jessup committed suicide. It was very tragic when you look closely at the facts and details. But he was fascinated with this stuff for years. And it's interesting how his fascination kind of went hand in hand with leading him into such a deep depression that he ends up taking his own life. His isn't the only story where the weird leads to destruction. So anyway, that's a tangent. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just had a few comments really quick on Sidney Gottlieb. So
Yeah.
Sidney Gottlieb had a brother. His name was David Gottlieb, and David Gottlieb was a plant biologist. Is that just coincidence or what? Plant biologist. He's experimenting with mushrooms and psychedelic, pills and stuff like that. I just thought that was really interesting when I was researching Sidney Gottlieb. But I wanted to throw out a theory really quick, and this is just 100% speculation and theory. It's just from my investigation into the Stargate and remote viewing and psychic and ESP research. I've actually interviewed quite a few people that were directly involved in the project, verified in the Stargate project, which there's a lot of. None of them are ever on the same page. It's kind of like with any, governmental program. No one's ever has the same story, which is
by design.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which is completely fine. I'm cool with putting the puzzle pieces together because I think that's part of the job and part of doing the show. Yeah. Exactly. So, because how I even got onto the Stargate project was from these SSP and super soldier people. They've all turned the Stargate project into something that it's not, right?
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to just research the shit out of this and interview real people that were a part of it, right?
Sure, yeah.
And that's what I did. And I'm talking to all these people, and I'm like, okay, well, at first it was an Army intelligence program. It officially became a SAP program, a special access program in 1979. At the DIA, and then the CIA was supposed to take it over in 95, and they just shut it down. And the CIA, the reason for shutting it down is the head of the CIA at the time, I can't remember his name, but he came out and said that there wasn't any valuable intelligence data that was ever collected from the program, right?
Right.
Which then I'm thinking, okay, well, there's a couple of scenarios. Why would the three-letter organization or any branch of the military ever shut down a program that's been running for almost 18 years and say that there was no valuable intelligence data ever collected? They're not going to do that. They're not going to keep something running for that long of amount of time if they're not getting any valuable information out of it, right?
Well, what you point out something good. What does that suggest when you know anything about how that world works? It's not that they didn't get anything good out of it. What they're not saying is, what they've done is they found a better version of it that they're replacing the old one.
Exactly. Boom. That's exactly my point. Yeah. And I'm like thinking, I'm racking in my brain. I'm like, okay, well, how could this evolve into something even more useful to them, because it's kind of evolved out of it really evolved out of the MK Ultra experiments. We've been talking about Sidney Gottlieb. There was a few of those sub projects that Sidney Gottlieb was directly experimenting using psychics and ESP. That was a few of the projects. There was at least 4 of them. So, and then it evolved into, them funding SRI, which was also studying psychics, and then it became an intelligence data thing. So then I'm like, okay, well, what could the next thing be? And then I'm interviewing Lynn Buchanan. He was a part of the Stargate project. And
indeed, yeah.
He's talking to me about how he was approached by government officials to ask him if he could psychically kill somebody with his mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I asked him in that interview, I was like, He said, well, I said no, obviously. And I was like, okay, well, good. But could you have killed the person that they wanted you to kill with your mind? Right. And I was like, I know that you wouldn't do it, whatever, blah, 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 but
Was
could
it
you have?
possible? Yeah.
Was it possible? Exactly. And he said, yes. He said, yes, I could have if I really wanted to
Right.
do it. I could have killed this person with my mind. And I'm like, holy shit. This is what this program has evolved into. It's evolved into, and if you can do that, I think that these programs were like an experimentation, right? It was trying to test to see how far these abilities could actually go. And that was a test for Lynn to see if he would actually want to be involved in another program that they were going to develop
Probably. Yeah.
later on,
Well,
which involved.
go back to what was the original goal of MK Ultra to begin with? What were they wanting to do? They wanted to create a mind-controlled assassin from the very beginning. That's what all the so it's the I mean, look, a slinky, the spring toy. They probably found a way to weaponize that. I mean, everything gets weaponized, unfortunately.
And I'm like, holy shit, this is and it. But I think that just killing somebody outright with your mind would be the lazy way to do it, right? You just wouldn't want to kill somebody unless they're a really big problem, unless there's a really big issue and you want to take them out quick. But
Yeah.
what you would want to do is you would want to remote influence or remote control somebody else psychically to do the assassination or do the killing for you.
That's ultimately what MK Ultra, that was part of that vision. Yeah, but what you're talking about is to take it to the next step. The innocent person out there that has no idea they're being used for this, and the suggestion that they might have developed what you're talking about was the trouble they got into with unwitting civilians being invited to those party houses where they had aerosol LSD and psilocybin stuff sprayed in the air, and they'd have these parties just to see, getting it, how suggestive, their minds would then be, their how controllable their wills would be. So that right there is clue number one, that what you just said, a complete unwitting person, not even in the intel structure, exactly, bingo, that they could flip a mental switch on, get them to do something. I think about how potentially frightening that would be to a society. And now I want to throw something else at you. Think about this. um, I think in this discussion it makes people take all the more seriously, how do we explain the number of serial killers since the 1960s? And more we're learning, Ted Bundy had connections to the Air Force and the intel community. There's a young
Charles
guy.
Manson, too.
Yeah, there's a guy out there who I've done a couple of books with, a guy named Todd Wood. In fact, I'm going to have him. We're going to start a regular series on my YouTube channel where I talk with him about his research, and he's been doing a whole bunch of research on this very thing. And it's there's a couple of guys who are connected to all these people. It's creepy, it's weird, but it's what you said. It's another clue that these kinds of games have been played to get the unwitting assassin, right? The mind controlled assassin. And yeah, that would be I mean, the best way to, take someone out, of course, is to make it look like natural causes. That's way better than the oops, they had an accident. The natural causes thing, oh, they had a heart attack, oh, they had an aneurysm. Well, if you could do that through some type of psychic implication, the real frightening thing about that is you got to be real careful who you train to do this, because you get a guy gets pissed off for the wrong reasons. I'll put it to you this way. When I was in agent training and they were teaching us the really cool stuff about when you interrogate or question or interview a subject, a potential, a criminal subject or whatever, and you learn the really cool tactics like the little mind games you just play in a conversation. They joke, they say, now, don't use this on your loved ones. This is only for when you're on the job. Ha ha, wink, wink, because they know darn well, every agent in there that has a teenager is going to be applying these things. So tell me about your date, and you're going to ask, and you're going to use all the tactics, and they know that. So on that low level, just with, interrogation questioning tactics, people are going to do that. Imagine the potential irresponsibility of something like this, where you have an intel officer who knows how to do what Lynn Buchanan can do and didn't have his ethics, right? Just someone that says, screw it, I'm mad. This guy, my wife's fooling around with, or if it's a female, my husband, this gal or whatever, they want to get revenge, right? So, suddenly, this person ends up with their, an aneurysm or their heart blasted out. Well, did they do that or what? And it could just be a willy-nilly thing, potential, if you believe in that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that might be a reason why they couldn't carry over any of the people that were involved in the actual Stargate project, because they had to wipe the slate clean. They had to start with new people and not bring the people that were previously in a program, a remote viewing program, into another
There's
program.
another, you bring up a very good point, and there's another, unfortunately, I think not a good motive for when Uncle Sam does that. They and again, I had inside friends in the FBI and in the intel community, that back during 9/11, the FBI did a very weird thing right after 9/11, when the Patriot Act and all that stuff was standing up. What they did was, and I had a former partner who was one of the ones that experienced this. What they did was they started pushing aside the seasoned, experienced agents and just recruiting a whole bunch of new agents. Why? Because the new agent, younger, newer, career minded, of course, is going to do whatever the boss says do, because they want to make a good impression. Whereas the older, seasoned agent is the one that's more likely to say, wait, you want us to what? Well, that's against the concept. We can't do that. Well, they don't want anyone questioning anything. They didn't want anyone questioning any of the nefarious stuff that came along with the Patriot Act after 9/11, right? So you get new personnel, and they're more pliable. They'll go along with whatever you say because it's painted up to be good for America. And exactly, that's probably exactly why they did that. If they push those original guys out, because they get the ones that are more controllable, that they can manipulate more, that are going to be less familiar with how things are actually supposed to go. And, then they can get away with, as much as they can get away with whatever ill use of a particular technology or method is possible.
I agree so much. So, where do you think that this community should go? I know we've kind of been all over the place, but I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. I've loved it. Um, I hope people have enjoyed it as well. So, where do you want to see this community go? Like, what route, what direction, since all of this new revelations has come out about, Corey Good, and that he made it all up, and then it was all part of his imagination, it's a part of his IP, and then he makes millions of dollars off of it, and he's
Well,
mad that he can't make millions of dollars anymore, and that
yeah,
he's only making thousands of dollars.
yeah.
So where would you like to see the community go after this? What
First
direction?
and first and foremost, do not kill the value and of speculative hypothesizing. Do not kill the value of the speculative discussion. Here's what you do. You just, if you engage in that, be honest. Say, this is just my idea. This is my hypothesis. I think this is possible. I could be wrong, but let's have the discussion, because you're going to get something out of it. There's a difference between that and these people that were doing these things where they were claiming it was all true, and they're an insider on something that you can't prove or disprove, and there's the line. What we need to stop doing is stop encouraging these people claiming to be insiders. Look, you can say what you want about Lou Elizondo. I'm not a fan, But you know what? There's evidence that the guy was in the military, that the guy, he's not lying about that. He's not lying about the profession, that, that he was in the national security structure for 20 years. What we're talking about are these knucklehead SSP fakers. The community has got to stop encouraging that and embracing that, no matter how fun it might be. Or if they are going to be present, the community needs to be more demanding of their claims. Say, okay, until you can provide something material, okay, that's all well and good. That's fun, but we're not taking you seriously. No matter how mad they get or they try to do that gaslighting thing. Well, of course I can't prove it, dude, because it's ultra. Well, then shut up about it. Because the fact is, if it was really something that ultra secret, if Corey Good or Randy Kramer and them were telling the truth, guess what? They would have lasted about maybe a month in the spotlight and something would have happened to them. They either would have shut up and gone away or something would have happened to them, because if all that stuff they're claiming was real, and it would have been so deeply classified that they would have been shut up one way or another. So that's one litmus test right there. But yeah, don't kill the speculative discussion, that nature of what we do in this community, because that's how we throw spaghetti against the wall and find the things that, when I say stick, are the ones that stick because there's evidence to back them up or they turn out to be true. Don't kill the conversation, but be more discerning. Look at what is said from one source to the other, with a little bit more of a critical eye. You know what I mean? It's like, I think psychic powers are a real thing. I don't believe the majority of the stories we hear in our community. And I think that's just the way it's got to be. But I would hate to see the community stop all conversation of extraordinary things. I just would like to see the community demand more honesty and yeah, ask for more evidence. Because if we did go that direction, open but cautious, you'd notice, you'd see a funny thing happen. You'd see less and less of the clowns and the fakers and the storytellers. You'd see less of them, because they'd go, whoa, this community, they're not going to buy into this crap I'm saying, so there's no money to be made here. They'd go somewhere else to find, to lie to people to try and get attention or make a living. So anyway, did that answer the question?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Sometimes I talk so much that
No,
I probably drive people nuts.
no, I love it, and I appreciate you a lot. And I think that we should be supporting people like you, and we should be reading your books. We should be supporting people like Walter. We should be supporting people like Dr. Joseph Farrell, like Darcy Weir. Darcy Weir's been putting together all kinds of great documentaries on this topic.
When you mention Joseph Farrell, not just him, but others have been a victim to this. I would also say, and particularly to any hosts of other shows, podcasts, or whatever that do this, there's people out there that they'll criticize one of these authors or someone, and I've asked them, have you read any of his books? No. Oh, you haven't actually read what the guy's saying, but you're smearing him and writing him off. That's something that needs to stop in our community. If you're going to openly criticize somebody and put them on your list of shysters, you better have read their material, in my opinion, or I'm not going to listen to your critique. It's hollow. I mean, think about that, because the reason I bring that up is there's nonsense that gets, there's things that get attributed, for instance, to Joseph Farrell. I've known the man personally for, my gosh, 18 years. And I'm telling you, there's things that get attributed to him that is the exact opposite of what he thinks and advocates. I mean, it's astonishing. The guy, he thinks Hanabu, for example, is as big a load of BS as I do. Okay. And I hear his critics saying, oh, Farrell promotes Hanabu and all. I'm like, No, he doesn't. So that's what I would ask of the hypercritical is, you know what? If you're gonna open your mouth, do your work. Don't be lazy. Know what you're talking about.
Exactly. I think that the Hanabu has just been lumped into the category with the Glocka, and people have just associated those
Sure.
two kinds of crafts with the
Unfortunately,
same
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with that 100%. And Dr. Joseph Farrell made me read his books before I interviewed him. So,
Exactly. See, and and you see
yeah,
why. Because when you
yeah.
get into and he's just one example. David Childress is another guy who takes, I think, unfair hits. And when you actually read his books, David's the kind of guy that says, here's an idea that's out there, here's another hypothesis that's out there, and he really leaves it up to the reader to decide. You decide what um and yet because of Ancient Aliens, people assume that and David would be the first one to tell you, Giorgio would tell you, they don't agree on every conclusion that is put out there, say, on that show. They have their different perspectives, but people, like you said, people like to lump things in because it's the easy, lazy way to criticize.
I think we should try and get like a roundtable discussion going on and get like you and Dr. Joseph Farrell if he's interested, and
Sure.
a few other researchers, and just
Yeah.
kind of just go around and do like a big show out of it if you're
Well,
interested, or if you know anybody else that's interested as well that
I've
you
started.
respect.
I've actually started having guests now. I got a stream meister, I call her, who runs the technical part. So now on my podcast, I can have guests, and in the coming month, I'm going to have, I've been talking with Farrell and with Childress and Scott DeHart and some others to start having them on. And I think that's a good idea. Definitely, ultimately have like a big roundtable, and have some of these guys that take criticism from folks that really don't know what they're talking about because they haven't read their works, and it gives them a chance to address some of the stuff that gets attributed to them that's not accurate. That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do all the research and find out what all these people are saying, so we can let all the air out of it. I
Yeah.
think that would be a really cool thing to do. But you just spoke about your podcast and your show. Let people know where they can find you online, plug your YouTube channel, and let people know, most importantly, where they can grab your books at.
Well, now the beauty is there's one-stop shopping. I have Lost Continent Library.com. Lost Continent Library is the name of my publishing company that I started 20 years ago, by the way, and been 20 years in business without interruption at all. Been going strong, but I now have the website, and at lostcontinentlibrary.com there are links to the books, which, by the way, are print on demand only via Lulu. I don't sell on Amazon. Amazon's not good for small press publishers. But yeah, go to lostcontinentlibrary.com. You can also link to the YouTube channel, which is the Walter Bosley channel on YouTube. So yeah, it's easier now to find my stuff.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Walter. I
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time this evening. I very much enjoyed it. All the links to Walter's information will be in the description of this video. And like I said before, it's highly important for us to support people like Walter and his work, because he's done astounding work. For everyone else, thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat, and Happy New Year. This will be showing after New Year, so hope everyone had a amazing New Year weekend, and I hope that everyone had a great Christmas weekend, and happy holidays to everyone. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. The links to all of my information is also in the description. And remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your art for everyone. Stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.